Hello, welcome back to Groves Nurseries. I'm Clive Groves and it is May. Now there's lots of jobs to do in the garden in May, but what we thought we'd do is get one of our senior plants ladies to show you how to make a hanging basket. But first of all, do you remember us planting a small tomato plant in a hanging basket last month? Well, this is now transformed into this. So full of blossom, and we've even got a little sort of embryo or two of tomatoes in here. So things are really starting to happen now. Now I'd like to introduce you to Mimi Gulliford. She does our hanging baskets, and she literally does hundreds a year. And they get sent all over Dorset, in fact, to private homes, to hotels and restaurants and pubs. And when she makes them up, she hangs them in behind here, do you see? And gradually this whole greenhouse is transformed into the hanging gardens of Babylon. So how does she do it? Let's find out. Mimi.
So today I'm going to be showing you how to plant up a live moss lined wire hanging basket. This is a 14-inch. This is the most common size that you would use, although they go from 10 up to about 18, 20 inches we commonly see. As I say, I'm using live moss. You can find live moss suppliers locally, but I wouldn't recommend trying to harvest it yourself. There are other types of liner available. You've got cardboard pulp liners, or you could use a coir matte liner, but as I say, today we'll be using live moss. It gives a nice natural effect, and once the plants are completely grown, you won't even see the moss. So we start off with creating a little sump. One tip I would recommend is to find an old pot like this and use that to stabilise the hanging basket. That'll make it much easier to use as you're planting. Start off with your sump, so we get a small amount of moss and create a small nest in the bottom. This is going to make up the bottom tier of our plants. We'll have 2 or 3 tiers in the side as well as planting in the top, and that means you end up with a much more rounded, full effect. So I've got my bottom tier here. Another good little tip is to get a small piece of plastic, a plastic bag or something like that, and just sit it in the bottom. That will create a little sump of water there without waterlogging the plant, which will help to keep moisture in the soil. I'm using a container and basket compost today. This is what we'd recommend. It's specially formulated with slow release nutrients that should last a season, although you will have to also feed at least twice a week, preferably 3 times a week, with a liquid feed. Any liquid feed will do, something like the Miracle Grow ready to use, or you can have a concentrated version. The other thing that we'd also recommend is to use gel crystals. Mix them in with your compost before you start, something like this. And what they'll do is they'll absorb the moisture and help to keep water, which will cut down watering. You should only have to water once a day, maybe twice if it's a really hot summer. So we mix up the compost, break it up so you haven't got any large clods, because they'll cause air pockets in the basket, which we don't want. And then a little scoop, and I just want to create a little well in the bottom for the first tier. Now for your first tier of plants, I would recommend to use foliage. It works really well on the bottom, something like the variegated Nepeta, which I'll be using today. You could also use Helichrysum, Lismachia, Convolvulus, anything like that, which will help to add to the dimensions of the hanging basket. And also with the foliage, particularly with the Nepeta, you can find it'll hang down 2 or 3 feet below the hanging basket and really give it a full effect. So we start off with Nepeta. I'm going to do 4 plants on this bottom tier. You can see I'm using a 9cm pot. You can plant from plugs. It's a little late in the season now for plugs to be available in your garden centre. So this is what you will probably see this time of year available to you in your garden centre. So that's what we're going to use today. And I would say for a 14-inch pot, you want to have at least 4 plants in this bottom tier. So just gently take the plant out of the pot. Another good tip is when you've got a long plant like this, in order not to damage the stems too much, just find a flat surface and lay the plant on its side, and with another plastic bag, gently roll the bag around the foliage like that. Keep hold of it at the bottom, and then you should be able to just feed that through without causing any damage to the plant, like that. Maybe just create a little well for it to sit in, like that, and that will be the bottom tier of the plant, of the hanging basket. So we do the same here. I tend to like to repeat the same plants on either side so that you create a nice even basket. That way when you hang it up, there shouldn't be any gaps. And as I say, you won't be able to see the actual basket itself because it will be so full of flower. So we turn this around and do the same on the other side. So that's our foliage plants in the bottom. You could also put two other here, so I think we're going to go for Siphonia, Petunia Siphonia. You see these commonly used in hanging baskets. They're brilliant, they hang down, they have really bright, large flowers, loads of impact, loads of colour, and they're an invaluable plant to use in hanging baskets. So use the same effect. Take my bag. It doesn't matter if you snap a couple of the ends off, because this will just serve to pinch out the tips and help the plant to bush out. You could also, you see this example's got flower on it. I'd actually recommend to pinch these flowers off. We don't want it to be flowering straight away. We want it to focus on establishing its roots before it starts expending energy into producing flower. So just pinch those off there. You can use just fine scissors or your secateurs, but I've got a nice sharp nail, so that'll do fine. Again, gently fold it round and feed it through, like that. And the same the other side. Might go for a different colour. That's another good point about Siphonias, is they come in such a range of bright colours. You can have dark, almost blacks, you get limes, whites. You also get ones with veining, so a paler colour with either pink or blue, generally, veining in between. Also things like limes, which are quite nice and work well against dark purples and blacks. So, same again. Just gently fold it round. I'm going to put that in. You want to try and make the bottom tier as low down to the plant, to the base of the basket as you can. Not right at the base, because otherwise it's just going to end up getting really waterlogged, and also once your side tiers have started to grow down, it'll be completely hidden. There won't be access to light, it won't have access to air. It's not really going to do very well. So that is our first tier. So before we build up to the second tier with soil, you need to take some more of the moss. You'll find that the moss is naturally in a mat like this, so we just gently tease a section apart and try and keep the natural matting. That will help to form a good barrier. And then we want to start just slowly teasing it around like this. You want the root of the plant to go into the compost. If the roots start to grow into the moss, as soon as that moss starts to dry out, those roots aren't going to survive. So try and get the root of the plant into the compost, but not cover up the foliage if you can help it with the moss, like this. So get right down and make sure that you can see there's no gaps where the soil can fall out, particularly once you've watered. Also means that you won't be getting so much air coming in and it won't dry out the compost so quickly, like this. And that's just about right. You just want to take a little bit and make sure you've got that end nice and filled up. And you can see that's going to create another nest. Now we can put the compost in here. So you want to be reasonably firm. Make sure that you've poked the soil down in between the root zones of the plants you're using, but not so firm, because remember, this is just a moss lining and you will go straight through it and cause holes in the lining. So just reasonably firm. And this will take us up to the second tier. I think actually, because these 9cm plants are so big, we'll be able to just do 2 tiers of plants here. If you were using plugs earlier in the season that you'd either grown yourself or that you'd bought in your local nursery as baby bedding, you could probably fit 3 tiers in, but this will be fine for what we need today. So when you come to the second tier, you can still use petunias, Saphinias. There's also the calabrachoas or million bells, which are the same as still a petunia with a much smaller flower. You tend to be more floriferous, so you get lots more flower, but they're much smaller and they create a really nice waterfall cascade effect. So I think I might use a couple of those here. You can also use other trailing plants, such as the trailing lobelia, work really well, tend to come in whites, blues, purples. Really, really pretty and very nice opaque misty effect, which is very nice. Other things like the bright yellow bidens. Now yellow works really well in a hanging basket, even if you wouldn't normally use it much in your garden, because we're going for bright colour impacts, and the yellow really helps to contrast against any pinks or reds or blues that you've got. White as well helps to lighten it up. Obviously that depends slightly on what your house is made from. If it's made from a red brick or a stone, that's going to work well. If you've got a render, a painted render, just think about that and consider the fact that any plants that you use with the same colour of the render aren't really going to show up against it. You want the best contrast you can to get the best impact. So I'm going to use a couple of these bidens. This is Pirate's Booty, which is a really good one. Really commonly found in most garden centres. But loads of yellow daisy flowers and really, really bright, stands up well next to the calabrachoa or the petunia saphinia. So again, using a plastic bag. So you can see I'm going to plant in between the 2 plants I've used on the bottom tier. I'll use more than 4 here because obviously you've got a wider circumference. But I still want to use the same idea of repeating plants on opposite sides of the basket to get a nice rounded full finish. Put that one in there and create, again, a little sump for it to sit in, so we know that the roots are going straight into that compost and not into the moss around it. We use some of these calabrachoa million bells. You can see how much that helps to protect the plant using a piece of plastic bag or whatever you've got. Let's take another one. It's a good idea to keep the labels when you take your plants out so that you know what you've used. You can see later on in the season what's worked well, what hasn't worked well, what you like, and make a note of it so that you can remember the following year what varieties you used. Put that one here. And because I've got a wider circumference here, you can see there's quite large gaps here, so it means I can squeeze in a few more plants. I'd say about 6 of this size, this 9cm size here. If you're using plugs and a 14-inch basket, you'd find that you could probably use about 18 plugs. I'm going to use 4, 6 and then 6 in the top here today, so 16 of these 9cm size bedding plants. So I think we'll go for the lobelia just because they work so well. You can see they've got this trailing habit, which means they'll just flow out and give a really nice cascading effect once they're in full flower. Again, this is quite a long example, and it's definitely worth, although it might seem a bit harsh, to take these ends off and encourage bushing. You'll get a much stronger, healthier plant, and it also means it gives it a bit of time to establish some root before it starts to develop flower bud there. So again, maybe I'll use a verbena here. Verbena is also another brilliant choice, particularly at the top tiers of that, of your hanging basket there. You can put them in the top as well, but I think they'll work really nicely on the outside, and you'll see that they'll naturally sit up and look for light, and you'll get lots of nice tiers of flower once they've established. I'm going to take that flower bud off. I don't want them flowering yet. Put that one in there. So same process, we're going to build it up to the top line here now, and then we'll be planting into the top of the basket. Take your moss and just gently feed it down in front of the roots of the plants, but not covering the foliage if you can help it. You want to create quite a nice amount here at the top with a slight lip above the height of the basket, and that will help to keep the soil in and help to keep the water in when you start watering. You don't want any runoff, because it means it's not going to saturate straight down through the basket. And get right down so that you can see that you're completely covering the edges of the basket and not leaving any gaps. It's always better to use slightly too much moss than too little. That will also mean that the basket can retain moisture better and won't dry out so quickly during the height of the summer, like that. There we go, that's there. And then we're ready to plant up the top of our basket. A bit more soil. Again, just gently make sure that you've filled the gaps in between the plants so you don't end up with any air pockets. Yeah, like that. Now, for the top of the basket, the first thing you want to do is think about what you want to have as your dot plant. This is going to be a more upright plant that will create a focal point in the centre of your basket. In the winter you can use things like the goldcrest conifer or a holly or something like that, something that gives you some architectural foliage, maybe some berry. In the summer we use geraniums, zonal geraniums, which are the upright geraniums. Or you could use a fuchsia, particularly if you've got a slightly more shaded spot that doesn't get as much sunshine. The fuchsia will tolerate those situations slightly better. So if I'm going to choose my geranium that I'm going to use, let me just go and grab one. So aside from the zonal upright bedding geraniums that we would use, we do also, you will find these in your local garden centre, you can get these trailing ivy leaf geraniums. You can see the leaf is much more like an ivy and it's more glaucous. And this you can use either around the edges to tumble over. You can also use it in that top tier as well if you really like geraniums. You can do the same with the trailing fuchsia around the side, and then your upright bush fuchsia in the centre works really nicely. But because we've got so much bedding in here today, we just need this one to use as a dot plant. So just gently tease it out of the pot, create a little well here. Try not to damage any roots of the plants you've already got here, and sink that in here like that. So for the bedding plants for the top of your basket, one of the ultimate favourites has to be Bacopa, which you see here. You'll find it in all your local garden centres. You get white, you can get pink or blue, these colours. And this is a golden leafed one, which works really nicely. The golden foliage will help to lighten the whole basket and make it not so solid, just one shade of green. So again, we want to look at where the gaps are in the side and then just sit these down in here. Keep it quite near to the centre of the basket because that will naturally come forward and trail over. This means that the roots again are going to be in that central reservoir of compost rather than trying to grow into the side of the moss here. But remember, you want to leave a little bit of room for your dot plant to establish itself. And use another one on the opposite side. Like that. Another brilliant choice for the top of the basket is Nemesia. Again, they come in a really large range of colours. This one's quite a nice blue with a yellow eye. A lot of them are scented as well, which adds quite a nice different dimension. So I'm going to use a couple of these. Now remember, we're going to go for about 6 plants in the top of this, so they're going to be reasonably close together. And because this is the top, actually once it's hung up you won't see it, so you want it to be really, really full so that it will cascade over and be the finishing touch on your basket. Let's use another one. Like that. And then for the last one, you could go for something like this Brachyscum. This has the really nice tiny little daisy flowers. They tend to be shades of purple or blue, and they work, again, like the lobelia. They make a very fine, misty, opaque finish, but they're really, really flowering. The flowering is excellent on them. But today I'm going to use these Diaceas. These are lovely. You get them in lots of different shades of pink mainly. They can get a kind of pale, almost white one, which I've got some here. Really pretty. And again, these will just cascade over the sides. And I'm going to be a little bit harsh again here and take this off. I don't want this flower. It's slightly too early in the season. We want to get these plants established well before they flower. And pop him in here. And one more on the last side. And that's enough plants to fill that 14-inch basket. If you wanted to, particularly if you're using a general compost rather than a specifically one for containers and baskets, this is the point where I'd recommend adding a granular feed or something like these Osmocote tablets. You'd need about 3 for this size. Just take one and using your thumb, push it down until your thumb reaches the top of the soil level. And that will help to provide a slow release continual feed to supplement your liquid feeding that you'll be doing in the height of the season once the plants are in full flower. Make sure to give it a really good water, needs a thorough soak, and just gently lift your chains up, making sure not to snap or damage any of the plants. And you will end up with a hanging basket like that. And that, in the height of the season, once that's grown, you won't see any of this moss, you won't see any of the wire. It'll be full, it'll be round, and it'll be really, really colourful. And that's how to plant up a hanging basket.
Right, well, thank you, Mimi. Now we know how to make a hanging basket. Now we'll keep hold of that hanging basket and we'll bring it back to you next month so you can see its progress, and then we'll think of another gardening topic, so we'll see you then.